And welcome back to the third episode of the Wellness Paradox podcast. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I am fascinated by a phenomena that I call the wellness paradox. The paradox, as I view it, is the gap between what we know as a health science community and what we actually address in the real world to make a real difference. This podcast aims to close off that gap by disseminating the latest, most engaging, and most evidence-based information in the health sciences. In episode 3, we're joined by Margaret Moore. Margaret is the founder and CEO of an organization called Wellcoaches. And over the past 20 years, they've trained over 13,000 coaches in 50 different countries. Margaret's passion for human health and well-being is truly palpable in this podcast. And we're going to talk about the coaching framework and how it actually works to induce human health behavior change. And we're even going to get into some conversation around how Wellcoaches as an organization, as well as the wellness coaching community, is working towards getting insurance reimbursement for their coaching services. I think you're going to find this to be a fascinating conversation. And I think you're going to find that Margaret and her colleagues are working very hard to close off the gap that exists in the wellness paradox. For more information about this episode and anything I talk about with Margaret, please go to our website, wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 3 for more info. And please enjoy this conversation with Margaret Moore. All right, well, welcome, everybody. We're here with Margaret Moore, the founder and CEO of Wellcoaches. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us today on the Wellness Paradox.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm very curious about the word paradox, so I can't wait to get into this conversation.
Absolutely, yes. And the paradox abounds in, I think, our field, and especially around coaching, and that's what we're going to talk about. But the first thing, just to give our listeners some context, tell us just first a little bit more about you and your background and what led you to starting Wellcoaches, and then we can get into Wellcoaches itself.
Thank you, Michael, for being interested. So, yes, I am a biologist with an MBA. I'm from Canada originally. I spent the first 17 years of my adult life in biotechnology. And on the business side. So I was in big vaccines companies, CEO of small biotech startups, obviously, high tech medicine side. And, but I was always kind of, what you might describe as a health nut, like since my teens, like since about age 15, 16. And so, as I went through my career in biotech, working on new stuff that would help cure diseases, make people healthier, it became very apparent to me that people were not taking good care of themselves. Some very smart MD, PhD types, not engaging in the basics. And back in the 90s, I mean, we were starting to understand the power of lifestyle as medicine, as exercise as medicine, although we have a lot more data now than we did. And so I thought, gosh, what am I going to do with this next phase of my life? And, what's needed? I always like to be at the beginning of things, like biotech, I was at the beginning of. And I thought, gosh, what if we had a profession in healthcare that was focused on health and wellness and focused on behavior change and mindset change and kind of like, helping you create a project around your well-being, which is not really, people they got work projects and they've got kids to raise. But when it comes to yourself, you often lose the discipline. You don't have a lot of structure. You just don't get it done. So that was my idea. So I started Wellcoaches, with the idea that we would build that workforce. So we built a school. We partnered with ACSM. The first year I talked to ACSM because we needed, the equivalent of a good housekeeping seal of approval from an established entity. And I think I got along with the ACSM folks right from the beginning because there's a lot of scientists there. Mm-hmm. And I had been leading scientists, working with scientists for a long time at that point. So I was very at home in that kind of world. And so I think we clicked. And so ACSM has been at our side all along, believing in coaching and mindset behavior change as an important extension of the exercise professional, and not only the exercise professional, others. So we built a school, and fast forward, I should say, we're at 13,000 coaches trained in 50 countries. And so we've done a lot of work in the last 20 years. And then I co-founded the Institute of Coaching, which is an academic coaching institute at McLean Hospital, which is a Harvard Medical School affiliate, and that is a home for coaching science and research for all of coaching, including leadership and business and positive psychology. And then about 10 years after I started Wellcoaches, there started to be a field of health and wellness coaching. And so we all agreed if we were going to make it through the gates of healthcare, we needed to create a unified standard.
Uh-huh.
And so a bunch of us got together, and we were competitors at that point. So it was not an easy collaboration to start, but we did. And now, 12 years later, that has turned into a partnership with the National Board of Medical Examiners that has been delivering physician licensing exams for 106 years. So they created the multiple choice exam in the 50s. And so they are extremely good at robust examinations that distinguish the well-trained professional from the not so well-trained professional. So now we have a national board exam for health and wellness coaches, and that group and a national board of health and wellness coaching that started up, officially 2 years ago. And in partnership with the VA, we got the American Medical Association to approve reimbursement codes for health and well-being coaching that started last year. And they're at the beginner level. We have a path to get them to the level where you then can get all the health plans and Medicare on board. And then we've also been talking to Medicare, CMS, about coaches being able to work under existing codes under the category of a health educator, which came in under the Affordable Care Act. So we've been working the policy levers for the last couple of years. And so the vision I set out, in 2000 of building a coaching workforce in healthcare, we've now made it through the gates of healthcare with codes that specify the national board credential. And next is to get reimbursement, and then that'll create a job. And then we then scale up to, hopefully coaches in 100,000, 200,000 doctors' offices. So that's the journey from a blank sheet of paper to an emerging workforce.
What a journey. And particularly that I knew some of your background, and before we got on, I was talking about I've gone through the Wellcoaches curriculum myself, but I did not know the start of it in biotech, nor did I know that you were that far through the gates of healthcare right now, which is not, and for those of the people that are listening that know healthcare, that is a very, very, very challenging gate to even get up to, let alone make it through. And I think a lot of people listening will be very excited by that. And I'm sure that that path is not fully forged yet. I'm sure there's still a lot more work ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've got, I have to say for much of those 20 years, I didn't have a roadmap. We're just taking one step at a time and never knew, whether we would get there. You don't know. But a lot of forces have helped. So, the literature now is substantial. And Gary Sforzo, who's an ACSM fellow, and I've, helped him become a coaching research, has done an incredible job pulling together the entire evidence base and publishing it in a compendium that's a public access. So now we're, well over 110, 115 randomized control studies. Once you've screened the literature for a coaching definition, so it has to be coaching and not education or case management, and some meta-analyses, and that's the work of a lot of researchers. Two of the papers are in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's a lot of work by a lot of people, and so and in fact, recently we were collecting some data on just how many coaching visits have been delivered by the healthcare groups we know that have teams of coaches. And we're like, in the last 5-6 years, we're well over 1 million,
Wow.
Coaching visits. So it's real. And a lot of people did a lot of work. My contribution was really getting the school started, publishing the textbook, building the first curriculum, which you now know about, and it's gone through many iterations. then Wellcoaches has studied the outcomes of our own protocol. We've got 12 peer-reviewed studies on that. So we went from like developing a protocol, testing it, and then continuing to refine the training, and then studying the impact of the protocol. So we've been on like a continuous improvement innovation journey all those years, and as a result have really been able to underpin the field with a good research-based protocol and now evidence for our protocol. So yeah, it is building a new profession is, the last one I think was naturopaths, and that was like a 30-year journey. So we probably do have another decade. I'd like it to be faster, but we probably have another 5-10 years before we're mainstream. Before this is a large profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for everyone who's listening, the one acronym that's came up a couple of times is ACSM. That's American College of Sport Medicine. I realize everyone listening may not know what the ACSM is. So American College of Sport Medicine. So I don't want to dive too deep into the Wellcoaches curriculum because I have so many things that I want to talk to you about. But can you give our listeners just a sense of what that curriculum is designed to do? Because I think that, and we're going to talk more about coaching and kind of the paradox that exists in what people think a coach is and what one really is. But how would you describe the curriculum?
Well, let me talk about the building blocks of human change, because now there are some very core building blocks that a lot of them have emerged in the last 20 years that we've integrated into a whole. We don't just teach the science, we teach you the protocol. Mm-hmm. The first one is self-determination theory. And basically, humans have 3 needs that are primary, without which we move into ill-being. Okay, so these are fundamental psychological needs. Number 1, believe it or not, is autonomy. Okay, what does that mean? I want to live by my own values. I want to march to my own drummer. I want to go my way. I want to make my choices. I want to be in charge. Now, look at all of health sciences, all of healthcare. Think about how much autonomy we give people. We give people the answer. We tell them what to do. We prescribe, we press, we nudge, we encourage. Do we ask them, why does your health matter to you? What makes it important? What would make it important? What were you like when you were at your healthiest? What were the conditions that allowed that to happen? Where are you going in your life? What would your health contribute to that? So we hit the pause button with people and have them move out of busy automatic pilot. I've got a very full life, everything's moving and turning, and I'm stretched, everywhere. And I don't have space to step back and ask, how important is my health to me? What do I want it to look like? What would it take to get there? So our job as coaches is to get people to a deeper level of reflection around what's important in their lives and how their health makes that possible, right? Because you don't have anything without your health. Nothing. You're just in bed. And I mean also emotional well-being and not just physical well-being. And so we want to help people kind of wake up to that in their own way, so that working on which is a continuous journey, working on their health and well-being becomes a lifelong journey. You're always on the path to well-being. It's a continual path. So to get onto that path, you have to kind of help people step back and figure out what that looks like. So that's autonomy. So that's about your motivation, what matters to you, why would you want to get healthy? And we just assume, us who are kind of health nuts, like I've been exercising regularly since I was 17. I have had my weight stable since I was 19. I am the same size as when I was a 15-year-old cheerleader. Okay, so what do you call that? Extreme self-regulation. Okay, like I am on top of this. I'm in my 60s. I am still on top of this. This is not my challenge. Okay. And I know a lot of people who are in the health, you can relate to me. You're going to say, yeah, we're like that. Well, you think we're typical? No way. We're not typical at all. And so, but we think everybody else is kind of like us. And so we've got motivation, but we've also got the resources. Like we know how to like build what positive psychology calls the psychological capital. So we know that, we know how to change ourselves. We know how to be optimistic about our ability to change. We know how to build our confidence. We know how to bounce back and be resilient. Whether we actually are explicit about it or not, we sort of, we're good at that kind of thing. Like we're actually good at self-regulation. We're good at changing ourselves. We're good at establishing habits. But in the positive psychology world, there's a model of strengths called character strengths, and there two of them are perseverance and self-regulation. Okay, so those are in my top 5. Probably those two or close, but they're the lowest on the list across the population. The human population scores really low in perseverance and self-regulation, and those are the things you need to make consistent changes. So most of us don't have the drive or the resources to make changes to our lifestyles. So we start, we stop, we just never get consistent. So the coaching approach is intended to help you find your own meaning and purpose and values and vision around your own health, whatever that looks like for you. But you have to do some digging. It doesn't just pop. And then help you build the resources and the confidence and take the steps to get there. So you're helping them set the compass and then starting to make small changes. And then the third thing I would say is that we now know, and I didn't know this at the beginning, but we now know from the science of neuroplasticity that the brain can only grow 1 millimeter a day of neural network. And neural network is what underpins new habits, new patterns, new memory, new emotions, new thoughts, the whole thing, right? That allows you to, live a different lifestyle. And it's 1 millimeter a day. That's really small. And it doesn't happen overnight. So you have to have a compass and a good deal of motivation to get there. And you have to keep refreshing it every day because motivation goes to sleep very quickly, as does confidence. So then the art and science of coaching is helping people just keep taking the next steps, setting the next experiments, not getting too big and ambitious. I mean, for some people, yes, running a marathon works. But for a lot of people, it's like next week, what am I going to do to sleep better? What am I going to do the week later to calm myself down? So when I walk, when I'm with my family at night, I'm calm and I'm relaxed. So those are the big building blocks: the autonomy and the motivation, the resources and strengths and all that to change and keeping that activated, and then the small changes that actually create the new way of life.
Yeah, and I love all that. And I think the thing that comes up as I hear you say that is when I think of a coach, at least before I understood what true coaching is in the context of the Wellcoaches coaching paradigm, I think of my old high school football coach with his whistle around his neck, barking out orders and yelling at me. And that, in point of fact, is the very opposite of what you refer to as a coach. Speak to that for a second, because I think that I'm sure you hear this a lot. Like, well, boy, this doesn't sound like the coaches that I once was coached by or you once were coached by. Right. How do you help people resolve those different images?
Right. Well, they are, that model. And I would say there, if you read some of the books by the greatest coaches, you'll find they have more of coaching methodology than they, so it's not, well, if you go back, decades, we were at a place where our society was structured with the people in charge at the top and the rest of us following the rules. Okay, so that's a different sort of society. And what self-determination theory has shown us, and to some extent we've evolved in this direction, we are as a society, as a human race, evolving we go through the space where we're part of a tribe and the authorities are the bosses and we just follow. Okay, that's earlier stage of development. The next one is when you're the boss of your life, you're self-authoring, and this is an adult development model. About 40% of people are in the following the rules, tell me what to do, and then another 45% or so are moving to, okay, I'm going to find my own way. Coaching has come along just as more and more people are moving out of the I'm just going to obey and follow the rules and do what you tell me into no, I can figure this out for myself. I'll take your rules or I'll leave them. I'm going to do my own thing. So we're coaching is tracking the evolution of human consciousness. And so more of us want more freedom and more control over our lives. And so so when you were back in the model of your coach is the boss and you do what they say and you're young and you follow, they're not pulling out the best of you, right? Because there's a meanness there. I mean, they make there's always this debate. Do you get more out of people when you push them to the limit, like you think about military training or Marines or something, or do you get more out of them inviting them to self-actualize, where do you want to go, and actually helping them find their natural life force and their natural. So there's still probably a place for that kind of discipline structure, and all of us have been through that, but that's not who we are anymore as human beings. We don't want to be told what to do anymore. In fact, we rebel. We rebel, and we may rebel like we see with teenagers, right? So autonomy is so fierce, and we're born with it and we die with it. So if you've got kids, they're pushing you every single day for more autonomy, and you're constantly as a parent trying to give them enough but not too much, because you want them to grow into who they are, but you don't want them to do something that will be damaging. And so it's this art. And then when you get to teenage land, forget it, you've lost control, right? And that's when autonomy just takes off. And then people will actually do things that are bad for them in order to defy someone else controlling them, because we do not like being controlled. And then when we're old and we start to lose our autonomy, we lose our ability to drive, we lose our home, we just keep stepping down. We start to fight and so we don't listen to the kids anymore. So it reverses. So so I think the coaching modality as it is in business and health, which is different from sports, is just really tracking into where we are as human beings and finding our own way. And so I think it fits the times and it fits the science of the times. All that I explained to you, there are very strong scientific models now. They're not coaching models, but they have given coaching a way of actually manifesting great science.
I think the fact of it being a sociological phenomenon is very interesting. That's a perspective I hadn't thought about before. That as we've evolved as individuals in a society. The other thing I think is interesting, and we don't want to dive too deep into this because I know that I can nerd out on this, and I'm sure you can even nerd out on this harder. But you mentioned self-determination theory, autonomy, relatedness, and connection. Those competence. Yeah. Oh man, I failed my first question on the Wellcoaches exam. I can't help but think that those things right now, as we're coming out of COVID, are in short supply. Right.
No, we all lost. We took a big autonomy hit. We felt incompetent many days because we'd never gone through anything like this and we're not sure how to navigate it. And we lost a lot of relational support that we had in friends and families, or at least it really got, we probably built it up in different ways, but we're starved for that. And look at the data on well-being. High prevalence of symptoms, not necessarily full diagnosis, but high prevalence of anxiety and depression. And then you've got addictions and substance abuse. And so all those things are up and burnout in healthcare. And that tracks, the fact that these core needs for autonomy, I want to go where I want to do, where I want to go, I want to do what I want to do. I want to be competent instead of feeling incompetent, and I want to be supported. And have relationships of mutual support. So we've all taken a hit in well-being terms. And it's natural. It sort of comes with the experience.
And we'll link up in the show notes to some information on self-determination theory, because I think it really underpins so much of what behavior change is truly about in any in any domain of life. And I think, again, we're not going to launch too deeply into it here, but I am keen to ask you about some of the research. I think, I've read some of it. Are there any studies that, particularly stick out in your mind? Maybe even some of the findings from the meta-analyses where you said, wow, like we're actually seeing some strong evidence base for this type of a coaching paradigm.
Yeah. So, right. So I think the first, health and wellness coaching, when we started Wellcoaches, there was a gang of just a few of us, and there really weren't any significant studies for a few years. So there wasn't much research from 2000 to 2005, a bit more from 2005, including Wellcoaches. And then it's been in the last 5 years that it's really grown. So it follows, and it's a pretty good linear development. And we doubled the randomized studies that were between 2000 2015, then 2016 to 2020 doubled. So it's grown. And one of the most important things we did actually Ruth Wollover at now, she was at Duke, she's now at Vanderbilt, a health psychologist. She brilliantly figured out that we needed to do a review of the literature to define the elements of coaching, so that we could then use that definition to screen the literature, because otherwise you don't know which is coaching and which is not. And so that was published in 2013. And so then my collaborator, Gary Sforzo, who is an exercise physiologist, a professor at Ithaca, he just retired, but he's in the American College of Sports Medicine community. I helped him become a coaching researcher. So he had put together a large team. They screened 1,000 papers. And in 2017, we've published a compendium, and then we updated it in 2 years later. And it'll probably get updated the next year or so. Okay, so what's in that compendium? The first thing is that there's 108 randomized control studies, and about 80% of them or so show clinically significant improvements in measures, like A1C, blood pressure, weight. In the obesity literature, there are 2 big randomized control studies in the New England Journal of Medicine, about 6-7 years apart, with large groups like 400 or 500. So if you get into the New England Journal of Medicine, it's a extremely rigorous protocol, and basically you have 6-7% or higher sustained weight loss 24 months out, which is even better than the CDC's diabetes prevention. And that doesn't seem like a lot of weight loss, but when it's a randomized control study and you're averaging everybody, and that is clinically significant. If you can get an average of 5 to 10% at 2 years, people are sustaining it. It's no small feat, right, to get there. So that's important. So then the other literature is in diabetes. There's quite a lot. And then after that, there's some in cardiovascular disease, cancer, pain, and then a smattering of, like, Wellcoaches did a very nice pilot in fibromyalgia with a very intensive coaching protocol, combining one-on-one and group for a year. So that's one of the more challenging populations, because you're using well-being as a tool to improve pain and functioning daily, like functioning with a very difficult disorder. So there's a lot of literature, and it's diverse, but it's all met the inclusion criteria of coaching. So at this point, you have definition for the competencies. You've got a good evidence base. That's how we got through the American Medical Association to get codes, because you have to have the evidence base. And so sure, there's more we can do, but I think there's a point at which the health plans and the payers are not interested in any more evidence, because randomized control studies are not necessarily real world kinds of situations, and they want to see the data in the real world. And that's what's happening now. There's probably, I clearly, I don't know what everybody's doing, but there's probably in the ballpark of 50 big healthcare organizations with coaching teams. So that's a decent, I mean, we've been at this for a long time training coaches, right? So there's teams of 10 to hundreds of coaches. Like what for Wellcoaches Premise Health, which delivers medical facilities in corporate organizations on site. We've trained hundreds of coaches there, and they're part of the medical team.
Mm-hmm.
That's been going on for a very long time. I mean, I remember doing our first workshop in like 2004, maybe 2005. So yeah, so we've got a good evidence base. We've got it like we've checked that box, and now we've got to get the real world, protocols established that, and then get the payers on board, and that's the next big stage.
Yeah, and we'll link up to some of that research in the show notes because it is so fascinating and it is important. I think what you said first is so critical. Defining what coaching actually is. What is that succinct definition? What are the competencies to actually do an appropriate comparison in the literature? Because coaching means so many different things to so many different people.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's been, that's been the challenge because we wanted to bring everybody under the same tent,
Mm-hmm.
one standard for coaches. And not everybody's under that tent. We're almost there, but you can imagine, there are people saying, well, I've got my health coach certification, or I've got my health coach certification. And for those of you listening who are in the fitness field, so this is something that's nuanced, but if you're in the fitness world, you know that the fitness world did not establish a unified standard for personal training, for group, instead the standard is each organization generates its own set of certifications and then gets those accredited as having validity. But there's no you went to college for exercise physiology, and that's clearly a path, but that's not the path for all fitness professionals. And so part of the reason the fitness professional isn't sitting in clinic is because the game is played in healthcare. The nurse has their nurse licenses, the dietitian has their licenses, the doctor has their licensing exams, and fitness instead created this diverse set of credentials that watered down the standard. And so what we had to do is to actually bring the coaching field together under one standard, or we'll never be taken seriously. We'll never make it to the next phase. And that was one of the hardest things to accomplish, was to get us all under one tent, because everyone had different models and different ways of doing it. And you can just imagine the amount of negotiating that went to get that done. It took us 5 years to get to agreement on standards. So I think that, that was the hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Because in business, and even in academia, everybody's competing, right? And so it goes against the grain to collaborate on the greater good. Because what do? You open up the market, you create lots of competition, right? Once you create the standards, but the standards are based on education, training, and a pass-fail of skills assessment. So you have to complete a program that meets the standard, that passes, gets approved, in order to do the coaching exam, which means that we could build robust standards of education, training, and skills assessment that instead of just having a whole bunch of exams. So we have one exam and lots of programs to go to that exam instead of many exams with no education standards. So that's a really, that was something I realized when I was living in the American College of Sports Medicine world, a long time ago, that that was not the right path for us if we were going to make it into the healthcare team.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great comparison. And I know, because I've lived that for 22 years of my career. Yeah. I can't say I'm surprised that a group of coaching organizations can figure out a way to collaborate. It seems like if there was any people that could be collaborative, it would be a bunch of coaches.
Yes, it's true. That's fair enough. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about, I think, the challenge that it seems like you're facing right now. As you said, the clinical trial research is there. That's a really robust evidence base. Now it's real world data. And I think this is where the challenge comes in, because as soon as you start to dive into coaching, you start to realize, well, this is about developing strong relationship, trust, rapport,
No.
really cultivating autonomy in that individual. And you're sitting there going, wow, this takes time. And so there's two kind of sides of the coin I want to ask you about. The first side is that's very counterculture to the American desire to have what they want right now and get it now. And then two, it's very time intensive for medical systems that are really time strapped right now, even more so now than ever, but even after COVID's over, that's going to be the case. So how are you finding ways to resolve maybe the inertia that exists both on the consumer end, the client, and on the healthcare end of the coach?
Yeah. So what's in the literature and what's in practice is that, the average number of coaching sessions or visits is the literature is around 10 or 11. Mm-hmm. And if you know diabetes prevention program, it's 22 visits in a year. So this is more efficient and gets similar results in a fewer visits, and that's generally spread out over 6-8 months. And then if you have a booster visit once a year and you come back, and at say $60 a visit they're 30 minutes, and often they'll go longer, but so you're talking about hundreds of dollars. And so then how do you make the financial case? So then you really have to play the numbers game. You've got to help the people where we know that if they establish a healthier lifestyle, it will make a difference sooner than later. So the reason the CDC was so brilliant in picking prediabetes, is because the numbers work. If you have prediabetes, so you have elevated fasting blood glucose and elevated A1Cs, but not in the diabetes range. You're in between normal and diabetes. It's almost like sort of stage 1 diabetes. If you exercise 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, so walk, that's not out of reach for most people, and lose 5% of your body weight, which is also not out of reach, you reduce your risk of diabetes by, depending on your age, between 58 and 71%. So once you get diabetes, you're spending $5 to $10 grand a year that you weren't spending when you were pre-diabetes. So you don't need to have a big calculator to figure out if you spend $600 a year on coaching to save $5,000 a year, this is a good return on investment. And my concern with diabetes prevention program is it's 1 year and done, and that's not enough. People do not, you need multi-layer. If it's taken multiple decades to get to a place where your biometrics aren't healthy, it's going to take you a while, and you're going to need to have a burst every year or two, right? To get, so you lose some weight and then you plateau for a while and you hold, and then you go on to the next thing. So it's an ongoing process. So that's an obvious one. Another obvious one is chronic pain because of the opioid addiction. And if you can get people on a well-being path instead of on a, like the substance abuse path is not a path of well-being. It's a path of escape. It's escaping ill-being. And so if you can move people with we're not mental health practitioners, but if you start helping people live a better life, they don't want, then they have a better life. They don't want to go back there. So chronic pain, and that's another place. And then there are, the health plans do these fancy predictive analytics, so they can tell from the data who has a good chance of going over a cliff with a stroke or heart attack or something bad in the next few years. And so if you lean in to that group, so we have to be thoughtful about, and collaborate with the payers around, okay, where can we make the biggest return on this investment in coaching? A coach friend of mine worked in a medical clinic for many years, and she would have at any one time somebody who they call them high utilizers, so people who are in the emergency room a lot, who are like fragile, maybe, and so with a coach coming alongside them, if you can keep them above water and functioning, you can save tens of thousands of dollars. So there's places to invest coaching where you can get, better returns than other places. So that's where we have to be thoughtful about using the coaching resource well.
Yeah, and so the economic argument is real. And for those of you that are listening that don't understand the economic scale of this, roughly 17.5% of our gross domestic product in this country goes to healthcare, which is more than twice that of any industrialized nation. And you mentioned the diabetes prevention program and why it was such a brilliant starting point. Based on the statistics that I've read, there's anywhere between 80 and 90 million pre-diabetics in our country.
Yeah, it's 30%, third of the population. So that's a crisis about to happen, and that means you should be running and not walking to work this. Yeah.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, from the data, it seems like only about a quarter to a third of that population actually knows they're pre-diabetic right now. So that really is, talk about a fiscal cliff.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember listening to a physician describe it as, first we had the wave of obesity that then triggered the wave of diabetes, and the next wave is dementia.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to have half the population with diabetes. And I should add that once you have diabetes, losing 5% of your body weight and walking 5 days a week for 30 minutes isn't enough. You have to do twice as much. You got to lose twice as much weight and exercise an hour a day. So prevention, intervening early. It's not that you can't improve things later and keep things on steady ground, but there's a lot to be said for investing early. And then, right now, the high levels of so coaching can focus on one's emotional well-being. So how do I have more fun in my life? How do I have more positive experiences, more creative flow experiences, better relationships? Those are all now health behaviors. Because there was a big Gallup study. I wrote an article for this on this at the Institute of Coaching that came out last year, surveying, I think it was about 2.5 million people in the United States. And with all this complex mathematical analysis, they figured out that if you have a high level of positive emotions and a good level of life satisfaction, like good life satisfaction is when you look back over your life and you say, I did a good job. I did well with what I have, and a lot of that has to do with resilience, bouncing back from crappy stuff. So anyway, when those are high, the engagement in health behaviors is much higher. So if we help people have better lives, which is fun to talk about, how can you have more positive emotions? How can you have more positive experiences? How can you cultivate psychological capital? We don't necessarily use that word. Mm-hmm. That increases the engagement in health behaviors. And you haven't even talked about eating fruits and veggies and exercise. And it's still, and those are very worthwhile goals. So it's not, so you don't just have to talk about weight loss and exercise and food and stress. We can actually work on people living better lives and knowing that that will pull the levers that will improve health, both directly because positive emotions, so negative emotions change genetic expression in 3 pathways of the immune system that then lead you to be vulnerable to a chronic disease. So chronic stress, lack of sleep, loneliness, depression. And so if you then flip it around and have the positive behaviors, then you stop the epigenetic changes in gene pathways that make you vulnerable to chronic disease. So the improved positivity directly impacts physiology by itself. Plus, it gives you the resources to want to keep your life going. And then you say, well, maybe I'd feel better if I had the salad than the pizza. And maybe I'd have more energy if I drank, half a glass of wine instead of half the bottle. Or maybe you start because you don't want to give up the good life, right? So it's a lot of bang for the investment in focusing on living a good life.
I love it. And I feel like this conversation can go on for hours for me and maybe for many people in our audience, but I do want to be mindful of time. And so I want to bring this to a close. the last question before we talk about where people can find out a little bit more about Wellcoaches is really relating to the topic of this podcast. We talked prior to getting on air that I view the wellness paradox as the difference between what we're actually capable of doing as a health science community and what we are doing. And there's a gap there. And many people like you and so many other guests in our podcast are working hard to close off that gap. If there was one thing that you could tell the people listening to this podcast that they can do to help to work to close off that gap as a collaborative community, what would you say it would be?
Well, we've been talking about coaching, so I think the best thing you can do is to change the conversation to be one that lights the candle or lights the fire. People have a pilot light, right? Mm-hmm. And you want that to burn a bit hotter. And that motivation comes from within. And so I think learning these skills, I mean, obviously that's self-serving because that's why I'm here to talk to you. But I think that's the most important thing, which is that it's not about the knowledge. If knowledge changed behavior, the job would be done. Mm-hmm. And so all the knowledge in the world isn't going to fix things. We have to help people cultivate the mindset to grow themselves, to expand themselves. The other thing I would say is trust that everyone is operating under their full potential. That we have way more resources and way more potential to live our fullest of lives. And so I would say, grow yourself. Just, tackle your challenges, develop yourself into a leader, develop yourself into someone who makes a difference. And if you focus on outcomes, then eventually the skills that you choose will be the ones that deliver better outcomes. But you're likely going to have to expand yourself too. And you probably get that having just finished coaching school, that you start asking bigger questions. Who am I? Who do I want to be? What if I didn't try to fix, rescue, and judge everybody, which is me meeting my self-determination needs? What if I actually took off that hat and started focusing on deep conversations that get people to think, to feel, to yearn, to actually engage? Much deeper conversations. And also to not be afraid of the messiness. People's lives are messy, including our own. And it's just what it is. And you've got to be okay to be there, not run away from it, not avoid it, be with people. Because one of the biggest gifts we can do is to be with people when it's hard for us, because we're tired, we don't feel like listening anymore, we're introverts, we're whatever, we're impatient, we're just go deeper with people and yourself. And humans grow together. And our superficial society, with all the devices and everything, we don't pull back and ask the big questions. Who do I want to be? What will I have regretted not doing on my deathbed? What is it that will make the biggest difference? How do I get out of my own way, my own ego, my own need to show how much I know? I mean, I still do it, and as soon as you tell people what you know, they say, oh, that's really nice. But you don't know me. They say that to themselves. And that's hard, right? Because you spend all this time in school learning all this stuff and they don't care. They're not interested. They just want to know you care and that you really are in their shoes with them. And that's when people will change, because they know you really are with them and you believe in them and you're not going to run away and you're going to sit with them and help them figure it out. That's hard stuff. It's one of the hardest skill sets. And so, just, I think those would be my main themes.
I love it. Such sage advice and such an amazing journey for yourself if you choose to go on it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's really about growing your consciousness and helping others. The health part comes along with that. Mm-hmm. But being really awake to who you are and how you're behaving and why you do what you do, and then why other people, and to be interested, genuinely interested, rather than judgmental. Why are these people doing this stupid stuff? Like, what's wrong with them? We say that to ourselves all the time, right? And that drives people away because they know. And then they think you don't know what it's like to be me. You never will. And so I don't trust you. yeah, so this is about human connection in a deeper way than we've been doing in our worlds in recent years. I think in the past, we've had more time, more Sundays, more, more time standing around, more dead time. We had more connection than we do now. We've lost that. And so, yeah, so this is really about being human and helping other humans.
Margaret, so inspirational. The passion comes through in your voice, and as I said, we could talk forever on this, but I really appreciate you joining us. Where can people go if they want to find out more about the amazing things that Wellcoaches are doing?
Yeah, so it's very simple. Wellcoaches, WELL coaches.com, and I'm coachmeg.com.
Perfect, and we'll link up to that in the show notes. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a delight. You've been a great host.
Thank you.
Well, I truly hope you enjoyed that conversation with Margaret Moore. If you found it valuable and insightful, please share with your friends and colleagues, and maybe even leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Those reviews really do make a difference for us. For more information on Margaret or anything we talked about, you can go to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 3. Be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops, and please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again, please be well.